DLC is possibly one of the best things to happen in the industry. There, I said it. Oh, wait, just don't leave just yet. Just let me explain for like a little bit, okay? And then you can write me about all my poor life choices and everything else in the comments in this video. You know, ask me intellectual and thought-provoking questions. No, that would be like cool, like real cool. Still there? Cool, strap in, because I'm going to be covering a lot of subject matter, and it's going to be way too short a time period. So, what do we think of when we heard the word DLC? Evil practices, incomplete games, money-grubbing companies, and the occasional good one in between. Downloadable content has gotten so much flack over the years, from consumers believing all DLC to be the devil, and them feeling entitled to the complete game. It supposedly keeps the devs away from the game as they need to stop producing the DLC or the game is not even finished. And you know what? I'm here to tell you that all that is false. You know, it's like 95% of it. I mean, you always have some bad acts in there. DLC has been around for way longer than some of you might think. The very first instance of DLC can be actually traced back to 1997, where the devs of Total Annihilation started with offering 1 free unit per month. Now move forward for a few years to the year of 2005. And then of course you later to and the longest console generation we've ever had. Seriously, the 7th-gen console runs for almost 9 years. That's like all of my teen years. How are we supposed to innovate or keep on using such archaic hardware? We might have just gone back to pulling on Atari and Commodore. But yeah, we're kind of getting off topic here. The 7th generation of consoles, though, had something that no one else could ever have dreamed of before. The unlimited power of the internet, which brought with the possibility for the first time in history to fully patch up and to add to the games after release. Now why is it such a big deal, you might ask? Well, my dear friend, it's very easy. Because it solved one of the biggest problems in the gaming industry. It's horribly abysmal job retention. But to explain why, I'm first going to need to go into the production cycle of the gaming industry. In general, all games are created along the same process according to the following 6 stages: pre-production, production, alpha, beta, final, and the rest stage. After which we start it all over again back in the pre-production phase for the next project. So let's start at the beginning. Pre-production is the stage where most ideas are being generated. The main gameplay and the scope of the game is set during this period by a core team of devs. Now, most of the time during this phase is being spent creating GDDs, better known as game design documents, and eventually finish off in this stage with the creation of the first playable prototype of the game. Once that prototype has been approved by the publishers and the executives, we move on to the production phase of the game, where we production, as the term might suggest. It's where all of the content of the game gets made. Levels, classes, story, and so much more gets created in this stage. This is then, obviously, the time where most of the talent actually gets hired. During production time, the studio needs a lot more horsepower to make sure that they can make as much as they can within the short amount of time they have. This is because the production stage is on a time limit. Before the production stage even started, a schedule has been set for the end of production, after which the game will be called feature complete. Due to this schedule, developers need to work out what they will and will not fit in the game before the end of that schedule. Some concepts are simply too large to complete or way too hard to realize than initially thought. This content then sequentially needs to be cut from the main game as it didn't really fit into the scope of the production. You just simply can't build a castle within a week. Well, at least not a castle that won't collapse when you lean against the wall. Once the schedule has been met and the game has been officially dubbed as feature complete, we move on towards the alpha stage of development. This is where we throw out all new content. It's done. All we could make is in the game. Instead of making the new content, this is where we focus on making the game stable and bug-free. During this stage, the team will have a burn-down chart, where every day the quality assurance team will add every single bug they can find. From that moment onwards, the team will work every single day, except for weekends, of course. Unless it's crunch time, and the word weekend holds kind of no meaning anymore. They will work every single day to try and fix more bugs than the QA team can deliver, striving to eventually remove all the bugs from the list. During this stage, a lot more content gets cut, as some bugs just cannot be properly fixed. As the game hardens and gets more stable, more and more content gets actually locked down, or better said, labeled as done. This is why we can keep those spots stable, and we prevent new bugs from being introduced to the game. Once every part of the game has been locked down, we move onwards towards the fabled beta of the game. However, not the one you know. You see, you've probably heard of an alpha or a beta of some kind. Maybe you've even participated in one. There's only one thing to keep in mind. A public beta and the beta phase of production are often completely different things. When it comes to playtesting, the word beta is often more akin to the slang than the actual process of a beta stage. The word has become recognizable in the modern media as a marketing term, but they are clearly still fixing and tuning a lot of the content, and sometimes even introducing new systems. Public betas and the internal beta phase of production are two entirely different concepts, so please keep that in mind as we move forward. So, with that little disclaimer out of the way, we can now move on to the beta phase of production. This is the point where the whole game is already on lockdown. The base code has been tightly secured to make sure that the game stays stable. During this phase, no new content is allowed at all. The only thing done in this stage is fixing the last bugs in the system, or labeling them as shippable. The leadership on the project has to carefully evaluate what does and doesn't get into the game. At this point, fixes are often more like local hacks of the game, to fix a very localized problem, because everything else has already been locked down. Eventually though, the beta stage ends when the team has a final submission candidate, sending the game into the certification process, and the team into the final stage of production. The final stage. The most boring and the most stressful period ever! During the final phase of game development, the team has nothing to do, but must be on constant standby as the game is being certified by the first party, like for example Sony or Microsoft. This stage can easily take from a few weeks to around a month of time, or sometimes even longer depending on the amount of versions of the game you have. At any moment during the certification period, the first party can send back the game with issues that need to be addressed before the game will actually be allowed on their platform, which leaves every employee tense while they wait for the word to come around. Eventually, the game will get past the certification process, allowing the game to be sold and for the team to take their well-deserved rest. So, whew, that was a lot. And what the hell has all of that to do with DLC? Well, I hear you, you impatient watcher. Let me get right back into the action for you. So what I just explained is in all honesty perhaps an teensy bit outdated. You see, that's how it worked back before the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 became big. Back in the years before 2006 where games couldn't be updated yet. And it brought its own share of problems. Keeping a full team of devs operational is expensive. Like, very expensive. Which led to some very problematic solutions when it came to saving money. The certification period and the pre-production stages of development only need a core team of devs to keep the studio operational, leaving a fairly large gap where most devs on the team actually had nothing to do. So yeah, naturally the first solution that came to mind was to cut them off from the team during those times of production. This made for, as you might expect, for some very unstable working conditions between the studio and the employee. Many older game devs have left the gaming industry because of burnouts. It was just not worth it to work your ass off and have a massive crunch time, only to just be thrown straight out after the work was done, only hoping to be hired again afterwards. But then,
11 years ago.
Wait, what? 11 years already? Jesus Christ, man, I'm getting old. Alright then, okay.
11 years ago, the Lord and Savior DLC arose to save the poor souls.
Kinda. Sort of. After the birth of the 7th gen consoles, there was a very large sudden change. Suddenly, we could update our games after they got them through certification. And with that change came one very important change in the industry. A spike in job retention. The subtle shift in content creation for games came with a renewed focus for all the left-behind programmers, artists, story writers, designers and more. Now all of a sudden, instead of being laid off during the certification and the pre-production stage, the devs could continue working on patches and DLC until the next production stage would start, but it would all just slowly merge back into the main team. This way, we can give all those devs a way better working environment and we can have more awesome game stuff. What more could you want? But I can hear your outcry already. Sure, DLC might have helped in the industry, but it's completely consumer unfriendly. They're just cutting parts away from the complete game to sell them to us piecemeal just to get a few extra bucks out of us. We're supposed to get a complete game for the money we spend. The complete game, according to the masses, means of course that a consumer would have the right to every piece of content that's created before the release of the game. And you know what? I already know that people are gonna want my head for this one, but it needs to be said. The idea of the complete game is a complete fallacy.
The heat is swelling in you now.
The complete game is something that sprung up just a few years ago when the DLC got an aggressive marketing push by bigger companies such as EA and Ubisoft. Suddenly, every game had more and more extra content that needed to be bought after the fact, and it made the consumers feel like they never had hold of all the game had to offer. We humans like to complete things. It makes us feel good, and all of a sudden, it felt like games we bought weren't complete. How could that be when publishers flung DLCs around as if it was nothing, holding delicious pieces of game under our noses as if they were a freshly baked pie, only to withhold them from our oh so hungry tummies?
Oh, how hateful those evil publishers are.
Or are they? You see, as with everything in life, there's no black and white. There are only shades of grey. Like 256 of them, not 50. Many consumers feel like the games of this day and era hold less content, as if it were held back. According to them, games offered a lot more back in the day when there was no DLC. They just created all the content and released the game as a whole, right? But if we remember back to the development process, then we notice some discrepancies there.
Some concepts are simply too large to complete or way too hard to realize than initially thought. This content then sequentially needs to be cut from the main game as it didn't really fit into the scope of the production.
Back then we never got the whole game that we talked about. Game content always gets cut, everywhere. Back in those days, that content might have been used for a sequel, or maybe even for an expansion pack if the devs were particularly daring. In the end, most content just never made it into the real game. Take for example the ending of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. The original ending of that game was received as rather lackluster. Later on, however, people found out that there were multiple different endings hidden within the game files, all of them cut from the game for various reasons. That content is what makes up almost all of the DLC that we find nowadays. Content cut from the main game brought to renewed life. Or in some cases, more in a state of undead. Or unliving, I guess. DLC gives us the ability to relive lost stories and uncover new paths that were previously impossible to find. But why, oh why, does that content actually get cut? Well, it's easy. Everybody needs to get paid at the end of the day. But, no, wait, no, not in that way. I didn't mean publishers' scumbaggery here. I meant actual payment for those who create the precious games. Making games is an expensive business. So as you would expect, a tight budget needs to be kept. That budget holds all the resources. Time, wages, extra costs, licenses, and so much more. All of that needs to be calculated and estimated beforehand, lest the game will run out of control. I mean, look at Double Fine's Broken Age for a budget that completely out of control, and look what that got you. No, at the end of the day, everything needs to be paid for. Elongating production for a week to cram in that last feature cost the time of the studio, the devs in it, and all the money needed to keep the studio open for a week longer, which can already lead to massive financial losses. Even better, almost all publicly owned companies have a legally binding fiduciary duty to their shareholders to be as profitable as possible. This means that almost all game studios cannot simply work longer on a game unless they can state with certainty that that loss in time will in the end be more profitable to the company and its shareholders than when it wouldn't have extended the production time. All of that leads to the creation of tight budgets to make sure nothing will run out of hand. and the budget is nothing more than a predetermined amount of resources that are available to the studio to create the game with. And that process hasn't changed much over the years. The budget might have gone bigger as the industry has grown, but no matter the size of the budget, at the end of the day, that budget needs to actually make profit with its sales. And if it doesn't, the game will still be considered a failure. So how do budgets in all actuality work then? When it comes to game design, it's easiest to compare the game to like a bag of balloons. All the planned features from the pre-production stage are the empty balloons, and the budget is your helium tank. The tank only holds a finite amount of helium that we can use to blow up the balloons that we use to fill up the balloon bag. But we also of course need to keep in mind that the balloons are going to need to be at least a minimum size for them to be allowed in the balloon bag. I mean, wouldn't you hate it if a balloon bag was filled with like shitty pea-sized balloons? Wouldn't you hate that? I would hate that. So with those rules established, we'll try and fill up the balloon bag to the best of our capability. Problem is though, that we can't really see which balloons are going to be easy to fill before we fill them. Some balloons might be leaky, some might need a whole lot more helium, while some of them can't even take the pressure and just burst. All of those take away our finite supply of helium, leaving us at the end of the day with a large amount of half-filled balloons that we just simply do not have the resources to fill up anymore. We spent some time tidying up the balloons and trying to make sure that we can at least make a neat and tidy package of those that we have, but that is all we can sell. However, that is where DLC enters the picture. Sometimes, a publisher might decide to purchase an extra tank of helium. The bag of balloons might already be out the door, but there were still so many half-full balloons that we can now fill up with the new tank of helium. The new tank of helium has its own cost though, so it will also need to make its own separate revenue. In this case, the money to buy the new tank needs to come from somewhere, and often that cost is distributed among the consumers. Sometimes you find devs that love their game so much that they opt to put in their own free hours, so the consumers might have something cool for free. Think for example of the original Zombies mode in Call of Duty World at War. A small team of devs spent a lot of time to create that in their spare time because they thought it was a fun addition. In this case, the devs paid for it with their own time and their loss in salary. This is an amazing gesture from the devs, but should in no means be something that should become the norm. Unless you want to go back to days where countless of devs just leave the industry because of a burnout. So, as a consumer, what is the whole game that you have a right to get for the price you pay? Well, it's the same as it's always been. The whole game is made on its main budget. Any DLC and more is created from another budget, one that in the end needs to make its own revenue to break even or be classified as a failure. The whole game in this case has never changed. It's still the same amount of game as that we would have gotten years ago. Arguably even more as the budget size have risen in size. Everything we can make with that one tank of helium is the whole game. All that DLC does is give us the option to have even more of that game than we could have ever had before. And this even applies to Day 1 DLC. All content needs to be paid for from something, so even Day 1 DLC, even though it might feel weird, just means that extra talent was hired during production with the extra budget to create more content. No actual production time on the main game is lost during this, we just get more of the game that you already love. That doesn't seem too bad now, does it? Or am I just wrong here? So, that was quite some talking. I'm feeling sore in my throat here, Jesus. Hopefully we can see that DLC in itself is not the devil. Possibly it's even more like an angel in disguise, as it solved so many problems that the industry had been facing, and has given us the capability to enjoy so much more of our lovely game content. But, as I've said before, nothing is black and white. And within our shades of grey, no, stay out of this, you stupid book! There are certainly shades that inch a lot closer to black than white when it comes to our Paragon and Renegade scale of morality. Many practices exist just to see if they can milk out the money from willing gamers. Projects such as the Deus Ex Mankind Divided pre-order bonuses, the Ark Survival Evolved release DLC during Early Access Beta, and the half a roster of fighters hidden behind DLC in Street Fighter X Tekken are often sketchy at best, and some of them are just outright exploitative. In the end, DLC itself is not the beast here, but the company that manipulates it. Devs just want to make good games, but some corporate shills find it to be more important to hide the wanted characters behind a paywall just to have that slight bit more revenue. But even in a world where that is true, we need to remind ourselves of the many wondrous DLC that we have received that were amazingly awesome. and to remind yourself that if we weren't in the marvelous age of unlimited internet, all of this wonderful content could have been lost in the void for ages to come. Just like the KOTOR II endings that we all preferred over the original ones. I want to severely thank all of you who've made it this far into the video. I know it's been a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time, and there are many aspects of this topic that I couldn't even cover without overblowing the length of this video. If you have questions, please feel free to ask away and I will try to answer as many of them as possible. And if you're interested in this subject, please, oh please, take a look at the sources on the screen right now for some extra reading. And as always, I have been Zev Gaming, and this has been an interesting look into the inner workings of DLC and the game industry. And never forget, just keep rolling.